Sticking with this theme of how the network connects with individual empowerment on these colossal systems, industries, like health, there's no system that, in my experience, is as colossal or as uninnovative as the energy industry. I happen to have been both the healthcare correspondent and the energy correspondent during my career at The Economist, so I know this at first hand. Let's talk a little bit about energy.
Yes.
There's been a push on smart grid.
Yes.
But it's pushing a rock, a very heavy rock, up a big hill.
Absolutely.
Give us an insight as to what might be a way to not let the ideal of some magical smart grid be the enemy of the good. What progress can we make?
So the president actually made smart grid a priority in the Recovery Act. When he chose sectors where he wanted to invest for the long term in the Recovery Act, smart grid was one of them. We put $4.5 billion on the street, matched by $5.5 billion of private capital. Not nearly as much as you need to get the nation's smart grid modernized, but a good start. And last Monday, Secretary Chu and a number of other leaders in Washington released one of our studies on building a strategy for smart grid that is acknowledging the fact that we're largely in this as impatient convener. You talked about big government. The report we issued was really about the role of the federal government as impatient convener because most of the regulatory authorities at the state level and so forth. But the notion of consumer empowerment was in this context. We issued a challenge to the private sector. Provide consumers access, machine-readable and human-readable access to their energy data. I have a smart meter in my house, Vijay. I can't get my energy data at the rate at which the machine is producing the data. So I get the same bill that I had a year ago.
Just to be clear, you have a smart meter that your utility installed.
Yes.
But you don't have real-time access to your own data.
I do not. And so we issued
that's ridiculous.
Challenge. Well, that was why we issued the challenge. And within a month of us issuing the challenge, so at the venue, the CEOs of 3 major utilities, Oncor, CenterPoint, and San Diego Gas and Electric, formed a consortium where they're inviting other utilities to come to the party, and they announced the biggest energy saver contest, bigestenergysaver.com, partnering with IBM and GE to figure out whether or not, if we liberated this information, we could see a new ecosystem of applications to be developed where the individual is empowered to make better choices so that they can lower their energy bills. And the evidence is early, but it does suggest that behavior change is possible when powered by information, and will be even more so when you have more controls over the energy-intensive components of your home. And that's why we have to have a standards environment that facilitates innovation, a big part of the report we issued that week.
Now, earlier this morning, Tony Malone, CTO of Verizon, was on stage with me, and one of the points he was making was, in liberating a lot of this data, we're leading to data overload.
Yes.
Maybe I am an energy nerd, maybe you are, but most Americans probably don't want to get into the minutia of every aspect of their lives.
Sure.
So if we do liberate this data, what's to say you're going to get the ideal, which is we all become very responsive and thoughtful and in real time adjust our behavior, our fridge, turn it up or turn it down and so on, versus people just get fed up and overloaded and boycott the whole system?
Well, it's actually, I wrote a blog about this, Vijay. I see 3 outcomes from this movement. The first outcome is the rise of information intermediaries. Obviously, a string of numbers every 6 seconds on my energy usage will be very boring to look at online.
Right.
But a third-party developer will make relevant that information for me, and in theory, connect it where we have control systems to areas where I can actually have a simple interface to make a difference. By the way, Verizon has been very active on these issues. I don't know if Tony talked about this, but again, thinking about the Fios network and other carriers are describing the same scenario where they can integrate some of this information, number one. Number two, we see the rise of new products and services that you would never have envisioned being powered by data like this. So it's more often than not we see this in healthcare, or actually my favorite is weather data. So I was with Vinod Khosla a few weeks back. He's invested in a company called Weatherbill, which is creating a whole new product of crop insurance. But the reason it is successful, it's gathering weather data, which is made available by NOAA, which is a federal agency that has the source data for weather, and it's consuming that information and then building value on top in a completely unrelated and different domain. That's another area where I see value. And then third, for the mission objective at hand, where we otherwise in Washington might have built some proprietary system that the government would fund for some outcome, we actually see this competitive market, this entrepreneurial ecosystem, bringing new products and services to actually deliver public services in new and creative ways. So It is conceivable, for example, our military bases that have energy concerns. We've had an operational energy strategy that was released by the DoD. They would like to be model users, and this liberation would allow us to bring new products and services onto the bases that could actually help to reduce our resort to our carbon footprint, if you will.
And of course, the military has long been a leader in thinking about this issue, not only because of the long tail of fuel supplies going out to warfront regions, but also actually quite early on the global warming front, thinking about medium-term scenarios of what might constitute risk for the U.S. You mentioned in passing early on manufacturing.
Yes.
Make the connection for us between what seems to be very high-tech network crowd that we're talking to, and what you mean with the connection with manufacturing of one of the oldest of the old economy industries.
Well, many of you follow this in the news. There's a concern about manufacturing jobs in this country. The president is traveling to Pittsburgh on Friday to release a strategy we've been working on manufacturing. I lead with the president's advisor on manufacturing, a strategy on advanced manufacturing. One of the big aha moments for me, Vijay, I didn't know this coming into the job, was the sheer the lack, I should say, of information technologies that have fueled small to medium-sized manufacturers. And I'm specifically referencing the tools that have made our larger manufacturers very, very successful, the use of modeling and simulation techniques to reduce cycle times, improve new product development turns. So
this is the kind of thing that Boeing uses to design its new airliners.
Yeah, Boeing has dramatically reduced the errors in wing design because they've modeled it out. In the old days, you'd actually have to go design, build, put it in the lab, test it physically, see the error, go back. I mean, it's a very long turn. With modeling and simulation techniques, you can actually do this at the speed of the internet, if you will. And the problem has been that this is a capability. You know, seat licenses for the software, we're talking about $50,000 a pop, $100,000 a pop. You need to have expert engineers that know how to use this stuff. So to the mom and pop manufacturers, which by the way account for the bulk of manufacturing employment in the US, they can't afford it. Now earlier I walked in on the conversation about cloud computing. So we put $5 million, half by the government, half by the US Council on Competitiveness, which includes Caterpillar, GE, Procter & Gamble, and others, to say, can we democratize access to modeling and simulation tools for small to medium-sized manufacturers? And we've done this in collaboration with the Ohio Supercomputing Center and the Indiana Nano Hub. So if you visit manufacturinghub.com, we've already announced the first batch of open source modeling and simulation tools on fluid measurements and so forth that are available for any developer to use, delivered through the cloud, so that those small to medium-sized manufacturers could have an impact. I don't know what you networking guys are doing.
Is it free at the point of use, or do they pay?
Right now, for the pilot, all of this is free. These are open source tools. NASA's contributed the tools it's built. Procter & Gamble contributed its tools, OpenFoam and others. And we believe there's a business model to be made by taking effectively one-off custom software and democratizing it in packages that can be delivered at price points that the small to medium-sized folks can afford. Right now, we're in the proof of concept stage to say, can this in fact improve performance to small to medium-sized manufacturers? We are absolutely committed to that thesis, and I would welcome the networking and information technologies community to partner up with the small to medium-sized manufacturers, often in rural America, where they need access to high-speed internet. In fact, I'll make one final observation. I was in state government before I came to, I was the governor's secretary of technology in Virginia. We did a map of broadband connectivity in the state, and we did it. One of the first things we did was we tapped it into the database of industrial parks that our economic development staff market to invite folks to come to the state. It turned out that the old days, you had to tell them the water, the plumbing, the sewer, that stuff had to be in place, transportation, in order to convince someone to come in. The first question they're asked today is access to broadband, high-speed broadband, ideally fiber, but perhaps not. And so we added a data field to track fiber availability and high-speed broadband availability in each of these industrial parks. So be there. It's a growth sector of the U.S. economy. You will do your country a great service if you help to retool the American manufacturing engine by powering them with the information technology.
And the role of the government in this, as I understand it, is your convener, collaborator, cheerleader, very clearly.
Yes.
Given your enthusiastic pitch today. And maybe a little bit of seed money, but it's mostly being done by the coalition partners. Is that right?
It is. There's three policy levers.
No, not to knock it, but just understand what you do.
That's the point, Vijay.
Right.
There are three policy levers that we don't talk about when normally we talk to Washington people. We normally talk about money in the form of big programs, legal environments, what are the rules of the road, and those are important questions, and I'm all over that. But the three things that we don't often talk about have an impact to this sector in particular. The liberation of data is obviously one we've talked about. Engaging on standards activities. Again, the role of the government is impatient convener. On smart grid, we are nudging the industry to open standards to promote that fridge that talks to the meter, that talks to the home energy management system to make that thing work. And third, pre-competitive R&D collaboration. So NASA, as a user of modeling and simulation tools, has contributed its open source tools to this collaborative as a partner and friend in the effort, not as regulatory framework or mandator.
Excellent. I'm going to turn to the audience in just a moment, so please collect your questions. And while you think about that, let me ask Aneesh a quick question. Open government. Now, a lot of things you've talked about are more provoking things outside the government.
Yes.
But actually releasing data from the government, it's taken a bit of a knock in the budgeting cycle.
Yes.
How serious is the effort, given that you've actually gone from, what is it, 35 million down to 8 million, something like that in the budget cycle?
Yes.
Quite a big cut. How, is this a body blow?
Not in the least. My first homework assignment when the president announced the creation of the CTO, it was actually his first full day in office. I hadn't been nominated, I hadn't been confirmed by the Senate. It was literally his first full day. He said, I want a more open and transparent government, defined as being more transparent, more participatory, more collaborative. And he directed the unnamed CTO to work with what is the traditional engine of these kinds of activities, the Office of Management and Budget, where we promulgate the administrative rules to run the government. And he said, look, I want us to instantiate the philosophy of governance that I care about into the fabric of how we run our agencies. And we have an $80 billion with a B IT budget for the federal government, distributed in a very decentralized way. And my colleague, the Chief Information Officer, Vivek Kundra, who is just a phenomenal asset to the country and one of my best friends, was responsible for the oversight of that money. In support of his efforts, he had an e-government fund, which was created in the Bush administration, that had been $35 million. Again, $35 million on a base of $80 billion. It's not a big chunk. And with that resource, he launched the IT dashboard, data.gov, and all manner of innovative tools that has been used to save money and be more effective in the use of government IT.
But he's
budget.
He's out the door.
That budget took
He's just resigned.
Well, yeah, he's going to go on to Harvard to be a thought leader, and we're going to utilize his brain power as we have the talented individuals who've come and gone in the administration. I lost my deputy.
He outsourced himself in some way.
No, I mean, look, you know, a lot of folks come to Washington. I was teasing Vijay backstage. This isn't the job you take if you celebrate work-life balance, okay? We got 2 little kids.
All right.
Vivek has a young girl. So the reality is, though, this president has made this the DNA for the federal government. There are literally 400 employees who focus on data.gov in the federal agencies. All of them are staffed up, paid for, working their magic. Every day we're launching new data sets. So we are moving ahead without any hesitation. And what's fascinating about it is how this is actually infiltrating our policy agenda. On healthcare, you look at the open health movement, we can go on all these.